Jose?
Yes. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Paz. Thank you all for attending this webinar this afternoon entitled Practical and Proven Ways to Inspire Creation Care in Your Community. My name is Jose Aguto. I'm the Associate Director at the Catholic Climate Covenant. I'm delighted to work with my colleague Paz on this webinar, and very excited about the presenters and the information that you're going to hear, and hoping and praying that it inspires you to move your care for creation ministry into your parishes and dioceses. Before we get started, I wanted to start off with a prayer from the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development, our colleagues in England, CAFOD. And before doing this prayer, wanted to remember in our thoughts and prayers Nick Lyster from Toledo, who was to be one of the presenters today but encountered a very serious tragedy. One of his friends passed away yesterday, and so we hope that you will hold him and his friend and all that they love in your hearts as we start this prayer, which begins, Lord, I come to do your will. And that is the response that you can say out loud or in the silence of your hearts as we go forth with this prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Mm-hmm. Lord, I come to do your will. Lord, allow my ears to listen to the cry of the earth, the voices of my sisters and brothers, those who face the harsh reality of climate change. Lord, I come
to do your will.
Lord, allow my eyes to see the beauty of creation in flowers, creatures, forests, and cities alike. Lord, I come to do your will. Lord, allow my voice to speak out for justice and ensure people living in poverty are heard. Lord, I come to do your will. Lord, allow my hands to care for the earth, to toil, to reap, to celebrate. Lord, I come to do your will. Lord, allow my feet to take the path less trod, to walk the extra mile, to take your message out to the world. Lord, I come to do your will. Amen.
Jose?
Spirit, amen.
Jose, some people are saying that you're fading. Could you speak a little bit louder into the phone?
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
I think he's muted.
Am I muted?
No, I think not, because we're hearing him.
But I see on his designation that there's a slash across his microphone.
Yeah, his computer is, but not the phone.
Gotcha, sorry.
So sorry. Is this better?
Yes, some people are saying now that they can hear you. Yes.
Okay, very good. So some logistical notes for our participants. This video is being recorded. It will be sent out in next month's newsletter and will be available on the Covenant's website in the resources section. We will also have a question and answer session after the presentations, approximately 20 minutes. Feel free to submit your questions by writing them in the chat box on the lower left side of your screen. You may need to scroll down to see the box. And please note that the questions and comments are only seen by presenters. If you have audio issues, it's most likely due to your Wi-Fi connection. You can try connecting by phone. Use the phone number and PIN in your registration email. Also, Chrome and Firefox are the preferred browsers for any meeting. With that said, I am pleased to provide the bios for the presenters today. And just noting that I was blessed to attend the conferences that our presenters were at or led, and were very inspiring, and I hope that the energy and spirit that they carried into these conferences and these presentations carries forth with you as well. So first I'm going to start with Stephanie Clary. She is the manager in Mission Outreach and Communications. She's the manager of Mission Outreach and Communication and the assistant editor of Vermont Catholic and the Catholic Relief Services Diocesan Director for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Burlington. She earned her BA in Religious Studies and a BA in Communication Studies from St. Mary's College and has an MA in Systematic Theology from Catholic Theological Union. In 2007, she coordinated the Year of Creation in Action for Ecological Justice, a conference in the Diocese of Burlington led by Bishop Coyne. Second, Peggy Riehl is the coordinator of instruction for the Diocese of Toledo's Catholic Education Department. She has a master's in renewable energy for teachers from the University of Toledo and has been a Catholic school teacher for 17 years. Currently, Peggy oversees and coordinates the Learning in a Faith-Filled Environment team, LIFE team, professional development quarterly meetings for representatives from each school. She also assists in the professional development for teachers and principals provided by both the Catholic Schools Office and the Office of Catechetical Formation. And last, we have Chris West, who works for Catholic Relief Services and has done so for more than 13 years. He currently directs the Partnership Training and Engagement Unit. Chris has over 20 years of experience in leadership development, training, and helping Catholics engage successfully in social mission. So with that, I'm pleased to hand it off to Stephanie to start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. It is great to be here. So as Jose said, I'm in the Diocese of Burlington, Vermont, and one of my main roles this past year has been coordinating the Year of Creation, which Bishop Coyne invited everyone in our diocese to over this past year. So in brief, the Year of Creation was a year set aside to intentionally kind of heighten our focus on the message of Laudato Si and Catholic social teaching on caring for creation. So all throughout the year, we had initiatives and projects. I'm going to summarize very briefly some of those for you today, specifically as we, in the ways that we related with schools, parishes, and our communities. So you can see on this slide here that we had kind of three main methods and three main audiences or members that we engaged with. And on a lot of my slides, you'll see in that bottom left corner that I have included a link to a further article that'll have a lot more details and further links if you're interested. So our methods, we wanted to include education, prayer, and action in everything that we did with our schools, parishes, and communities. And while it may seem like those methods and members kind of align laterally there, we really tried to integrate each of those methods with each of those communities so that it wasn't as if we were separating them out, but that we were exposing everybody to all of these different ways of engaging in creation care. So I'm kind of going to go through those member communities today to talk about the methods, but please do feel free to ask questions later on things I might not have touched on. Next slide, please. So one of the big events we did was a Catholic Schools Care for Creation Day last spring. And so this was timed to be near the Mercy to Earth weekend, right around Earth Day. And it happened to be during Holy Week. So all of our Catholic schools across the entire state of Vermont, because the Diocese of Burlington is the entire state, all of our schools on the same day were out in their communities, either learning about, praying about, or doing things that show a care for creation and the Catholic connection to that idea. So we have a picture here of our students from St. Michael's, how they were learning how the recycling and compost system works at their local solid waste management district. Then we have a photo of students from Christ the King that began their day with Mass, and the conversations during Mass, the homily and the prayers were focused around fruitfulness of the earth and giving thanks for God's creation. You can see in that photo too, they all had these great shirts that said Catholic Schools Work, and they were then very visible in the community as they, after Mass, they headed down the street to one of their local parks to help clean up litter, as well as some other things. For action, we have a photo here of some of the students from Sacred Heart St. Francis de Sales that kind of combined a few things. So they recycled old newspapers to create biodegradable flower pots. I believe the pots were then given to one of the residential care homes for the residents there to enjoy. But the nice thing about the biodegradable pot was that it could then be planted directly into the ground without any residual litter coming from that process. I do know that one of our high schools did a fundraiser where any of the money raised was donated to one of the local clean water resource nonprofits in the area. So sometimes people ask, we had this education prayer action with our schools. We didn't talk a whole lot about policy, but that's because most of these students are not of voting age. And our high schoolers did certainly learn a little bit about that as well. And while, like I said, this presentation is kind of organized into education, prayer, and action at 3 different schools, each school did integrate all 3 components into their day in various ways. And again, there's a link there in the corner if you're interested in learning more about the projects that some of those schools did throughout the state. Next slide, please. We had a few events that were coordinated either through the diocese or through a specific parish that then the diocese helped to promote and kind of execute the event. So again, I've highlighted 3 of those here, but there certainly were more. One that we started early on in the year was learning more about how the way we manage our waste materials can either be helpful or harmful. And so we're really fortunate here in Chittenden County, where our Chancery office is, that the Chittenden Solid Waste District is hugely supportive and helpful for those who may not understand exactly what's going on with everything we're throwing in our trash. So we had someone from the Waste District come do a presentation here to diocesan staff, and we Facebook Lived that presentation on our diocesan Facebook page for anyone else who wanted to learn about what happens to something when we throw it away and how we could maybe reduce what we're throwing away, reduce the amount of fuel used to transport those materials to the dump, and be more sustainable in our daily choices in the office. So after this presentation, the compost bins, like the little white one you see her carrying there, as well as the bigger one with the green lid, we now have all around our office, and we at the Chancery have been learning what goes where. We have little signs, and I know that especially in our schools and in the college Catholic centers at our universities, composting is something that they've been doing for a while, and we at the office and some of our parishes are a little bit behind where they are. So it was really great to learn how that all works. And then actually go forward with the action of doing that, always reusing first, using things that don't need to be thrown away, but then when we must use something disposable, if it could be recyclable or compostable, making those choices. For prayer, one of the really neat things that people really seem to enjoy, we did on the first Friday of Lent, and it was the Stations of the Cross with John Paul II on the path of ecological conversion, which was put together by the Franciscan Action Network. Bishop Coyne led that Stations of the Cross at the cathedral. And then following the Stations of the Cross, which if you're unfamiliar with that particular one, the reflections it uses are pulled from St. John Paul II's ecological writings. And then we followed it with a short presentation on the history of fasting in our Catholic faith, and then the global effect that fasting from certain foods can have on the world, on environmental degradation and climate change. And we had some local restaurants that actually donated us some local seasonal meat-free soups and bread, so that we were able to break bread together as we learned about fasting, and then shared some resources for different, there's a group that fasts on the first Monday of every month for sustainability and creation care, and some of those facts about why that makes a tangible difference, as well as prayerfully fasting, as many of us have done during Lent for years. Finally, under the action tablet, one of our parishes, Holy Family St. Lawrence, has a brand new parish center, which has been built to high efficiency standards. And even after it was built with the highest efficiency standards in mind, this committee, which they call the Green Kitchen Committee, decided they didn't want to stop there. As soon as one task was done, they wanted to think about, well, what else could we do to make this building as creation friendly as possible. And so they were here in this photo going through the process of replacing any even most recyclable products with ones that are actually biodegradable. And they have a high efficient dishwashing system that uses low levels of water. And then when community members and community groups rent out this space, they're also educated on which materials they should be using so that they can then use the compost and recycling bins that the committee has made sure are available in the building. So not only are they choosing to make an ethical decision in their resources, but then they're also educating the community who uses the space as well. And again, there's links there on the bottom for each of these events if you'd like to learn a little bit more about them. Next slide, please. Of course, our big event, which Jose mentioned, was in September during the Season of Creation. It was our Action for Ecological Justice Conference held at St. Michael's College in Colchester. And we had a keynote speaker as well as breakout workshops on many different topics. But it was really nice to kind of bring the community together at this event. We had some students, we did have some little ones there, but primarily high school and college students, as well as adults from throughout the state and even from some of our neighboring states, which was really exciting. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the conference. Again, the education, prayer, and action components, which kind of interweave just like everything else. But if I had to break them down, for education, we had our breakout sessions. You can see here, this one's being led by the Sisters of Mercy, Sister Mary Pendergast, who is also an awesome creation care personality here. So we had 9 breakout sessions, and participants could choose 2 of those to attend and learn about a specific aspect, be it clean water resources, spirituality, economics, climate justice from a scientific perspective, fair trade and ethical trade. So some of these kind of very specific topics that some might not even have realized are related to the idea of creation care, but really awesome presenters who shared their knowledge with us in those sessions. We had a prayer component led by Bob Hurd of OCP. So throughout the day, Bob led us in a refrain from one of the songs on their Care for Our Common Home album.
Hi, Stephanie, it seems like you...
Hello?
Stephanie?
I think we may have lost Stephanie.
I think so too. I think pause. We should move.
We can go forward and get to Peggy and then go finish up with Stephanie when she comes back on. So okay. She was on slide 9. We'll go back to that one when she comes back.
Great.
So,
thank you.
Peggy. Peggy? Peggy, you are muted. You may need to unmute yourself.
Hi, did you lose me there?
Yes, Stephanie, you're back.
Yes, so sorry about that. As I said, I'm connected on my phone, and my phone rang, and I guess it unconnected me.
Okay, so do we go back? We were on this one, I believe, so why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I'll just start with the education. Did you hear that at all?
Yes.
Okay, I'll start with prayer. So Bob led us in some prayerful, reflective songs throughout the day and then at the end of the day as well. And we heard from participants afterwards that this was really part of the conference that stuck out to them as something very different and significant from other justice conference they had been at. That we did have this prayerful component that kind of, after we had gained so much knowledge throughout the day and shared our stories with each other, we had time to reflect and sing and celebrate. And then the main event, which actually came first, but had one of the biggest action components, was our keynote address by Dr. Carolyn Wu, former president and CEO of Catholic Relief Services. And during her presentation, she talked a lot about how we could maybe invest our money in sustainable ways, and that how always with a sense of hope, we can pursue a better world through our concrete actions. One of my favorite quotes from her presentation is when she said that hope is when we believe that action can make a difference. And again, when we were getting feedback from people who had participated in the day, one of the things that came up over and over again was that they really felt that the conference instilled a sense of hope in them about this topic, that it wasn't, while it is upsetting to sometimes look at the current state of things, that they really felt inspired and hopeful walking away from this day, which I think speaks a lot to the presenters that we're sharing with them. So just quickly, next slide, please. Other direction. It should be a community. There we go. Perfect. This I'm not going to spend much time on. There is a blog post that I recently shared on To Go Forth, the USCCB's blog, about how we engaged with various aspects and community groups, as far as restaurants and the solid waste district, which I talked a little bit about, other faith and ecology organizations like Interfaith Power and Light, and also places like the Covenant or the Global Catholic Climate Movement, as well as a relationship we formed with one of our local public purpose energy service companies, which is very similar to the Covenant energy programs that the Covenant has recently launched. We're working with them for energy efficiency in our buildings. And so I won't spend much time on this, but there is a link there at the bottom to read the blog post on the USCCB's site about our community outreach. And then last slide, please. Just in closing, we really were very encouraged by the Catholic and community engagement in this event. These photos are from the reflection and song session at the end of the conference. All different ages, community members, vocations, here together celebrating creation, and that we could all come together for this. Really interesting statistic that we gathered was that we had over 200 people registered for this conference day, and 77% of those registered were new to our diocesan database. So that doesn't necessarily mean that 77% weren't Catholic or that they've never been to a Catholic Mass. It just means that they haven't been engaged in our events and our initiatives recent enough for their data to be up to date in our system. So that was really exciting for us to know that we had brought people together that maybe haven't been together at something like this before. And some of the feedback we heard was that those who typically are in more activist circles on things like sustainability and climate justice felt like this was an awesome opportunity to connect with some people who may be more active in eco-spirituality circles, or those who are interested in creation care based on a respect for life perspective aren't necessarily always in the same room with those who are interested in lowering the carbon content in our atmosphere. So people were very explicit in saying that in their feedback, which was really exciting for us to know that all of them had felt welcomed in this space and had felt like they had something to contribute, because they really do. And as we move forward, we just really hope that when we look at issues as we try to develop creation care teams and local parish groups that might carry some of these initiatives forward when the year of creation is over, that we have members, we have partners that are going to come in and be a part of that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Look forward to the questions for your presentation and wanting to move to Peggy. You're on, Peggy. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on part of this webinar today. So thank you for including me. I'm super excited to hear about everything that Stephanie just said, because it seems like so many connections will be able to be made that will carry through for the three different pieces of today's webinar. Her favorite quote from Dr. Wu, that hope is what we believe that action can make a difference, is such a perfect connection to what my master's project was in renewable energy, which was how do we use science and service projects together? So how can a service project engage kids to want to learn more about science? And I think it's kind of a nice way to kind of transition into my start. So 2 years ago in the Diocese of Toledo, the bishop requested that a task force be formed. We're meeting monthly, and we started out with a group of about 20 to 25 members from across the diocese. We are, our diocese represents 19 counties in Ohio. We're one of 5 dioceses, so a little bit different size than Stephanie's in Vermont. But the core group has kind of whittled down to more the 8 to 10 that are very regularly at the meetings. And several people do call in each time to try to join in. But we set a goal that we really wanted to try to have some type of an annual education event. So last year we did what we called the Living Laudato Si in our schools and parishes conference. It was a half day. It was on a Saturday. It was at the school that is connected with the cathedral at Rosary Cathedral School. And as a part of that day, we had quite a few community organizations that came and had booths. We had 2 different people that did breakout sessions. Hal Mann did one on how God created the monarch butterfly and why pollinators are so important. I did a speaking piece on living Laudato Si in our schools and shared many of the initiatives that sound like they were similar to some of the things that Stephanie's group did throughout the different dioceses and the different pieces that everyone was doing in their hometowns. The bishop addressed the group and talked about the importance of this being one of the pieces, caring for the poor and the vulnerable, and that this on the creation side of things, there are many different things that we can do, and trying to nudge people to take a little bit more of a step. While we had really good participation from the community, we were a bit disappointed with how many people actually attended. We had community representatives, but we had about as many people attend as we did the community representatives. So we really felt like going into the presentation for the next year, which was this year on October 4th, where we did the Care for Creation conference, that we wanted to try to have a little bit more lead time. We really realized that probably one of the biggest keys was getting it out to as many people, as many different ways as we could to advertise, to try to get the attendance that we were hoping for. So this flyer is what shows kind of a little bit of an overview of what we did for that first workshop. And then as we went into the next one of the things that I was trying to connect with was the team of teachers that I work with regularly. So as the coordinator of instruction for the Diocese of Toledo, I work with all of the teachers across the diocese and the principals, helping them to develop pieces for professional development for whatever the needs are at their individual schools. But we also know that there's trends across the diocese with things that we know that the whole diocese could take as an initiative, and we also know that we want to regularly fulfill the need of developing our Catholic faith along the way throughout the year. So probably about 15 years ago, the LIFE teams were first established, and they started meeting quarterly. So the LIFE acronym stands for Learning in a Faith-Filled Environment. So it's a team of teachers. All the schools are encouraged and invited to have a teacher attend these meetings. It's a way for them to get information to our staff at the diocesan office downtown here in Toledo, but also as a way for us to disseminate information out to them. And we always have one big piece of what we do each time we gather together as about our Catholic identity. And when we wrapped up the year in 2016, we had a guest who was one of our teachers who wrote a grant for the butterfly garden through NCEA. And I had helped her coach her through that process. So I knew she was out there and had success, and asked her if she would speak to our teachers at the end of our year, the year before. So at the end of that day, we decided we would vote on what the theme would be for the next year, and they voted for Laudato Si to be the emphasis for 2016-17. So when we knew at the parish level with the task force that we were not getting as high of an attendance as we had hoped, especially for the amount of energy that we put into the programming, that maybe we could springboard off of this group of teachers who now have had 4 meetings with a little bit different emphasis, you can see from the speakers that are listed here on this screen, to experience some different pieces of Laudato Si and some ways that they would be able to connect the information into the curriculum that they're teaching, as well as across the board in the curriculum, cross-curricularly with whatever they're teaching, with embedding our Catholic identity into their daily lives, that this would be a group we know would be needed. So when we decided to plan for the next piece, we thought maybe we could use this group and that first meeting date as a way to springboard into our next program. So one of the things that I've done with this team of teachers as a way to share information with them is I've developed what are called Google Classrooms. So it is something that's put out there by Google. That's a free app that teachers can use. It's a protected domain. So with my teacher teams, I'm able to build classrooms that they can join. So each time we gather together, I share out information based on whatever themes we're working on. And then they're given opportunities to network in the afternoon and figure which of those focuses they'd like to work on for that day or for all 4 meetings, so that they can develop something more in depth, so that when they take it back to their school, they can actually put things right into action in their classroom and hopefully spread it on a larger scale by presenting out to their staff and then possibly doing something school-wide. So by developing the different resources within Classroom, I'm able to share out some of the different themes that we worked on and provided those resources right there in a very user-friendly way for them to click on and use. It's a protected domain, so it's not something that I can just share out with everyone, but I could, figure out a way to be able to share the resources if you're interested in having some of these resources. But you can tell as I clicked through, there was different themes that we went through as we went through the year. So one of the meetings we focused more on water quality. One we focused on more on hunger. One we focused on the gardening theme. So each time that we came together, they were supposed to do something in their own classroom to bring back and share and talk about, so that we could continue on with the message of Laudato Si, digging a little deeper into our faith and embedding it in whatever the content areas might be that they are teaching at their grade level in their content areas. So many of the teachers that attend these meetings are elementary teachers, but it is across the board invitation to any of the schools in our diocese to join. So that was just one of the resources that I found that I thought could be handy. And then as we decided to develop the Care for Our Common Home conference for this year, we said, let's see if we can have that first meeting with the teachers springboard off of that theme. So we had teachers who had already had a little bit of some background. Many of them had joined some type of a book study in order to be able to actually read through and process Laudato Si, but Sister Sharon had come from Lourdes College and done an overview of the encyclical for the group at our very first meeting last year. And so we knew this group had a thirst for more information and had some knowledge base to be able to bring some good questions and hopefully be able to bring some other people from within their schools and their parishes along to build on the population base of the group that could be involved. So we set it to be October 4th, perfect. That was the first Wednesday. I usually meet first Wednesday with them in October, but it works out to be the St. Francis Care for St. Francis, Feast of St. Francis, I should say, and we thought that was probably a very telling sign. So I know one of the things it sounded like Jose wanted us to touch on were what are some things that we did to try to get people to actually come. And so here's a list of some of the different venues that we use to get the word out. We have a online document that's shared out of the bishop's office that gives diocesan links that can be added at the parish level to bulletins. So we use that through our office. We use the teacher bulletins, and we have also a biweekly principal newsletters that are given out. So in May, already for an October event, in May before school ended, we shared out a postcard size piece that could be passed out so that everybody had that and they could already put it on their calendar when they came back in the fall. It wouldn't be too late to try to get it on their schedules to get subs and to be able to get more people to attend. So here are a few of the documents that we use, just as a quick glance to see, one way that we tried to spread the word. The save the date card, as I said, was the postcard size. We tried to put it out through, we actually physically handed it to some people. When we had our principals meeting in the spring, we gave it to the director of the religious orders to be able to hand it to their regular convocation meeting in the spring as well, to kind of get the date out there. Then the lower right-hand corner here, this piece is an example of just similar to what Stephanie was doing, a Pray, Act, Advocate. So in the teacher bulletins that go out monthly, I had something that would be a link that might have been, to click on it, and it was a prayer, some suggestions of what they could do to act in their schools, in their classrooms, and then some things that they might be able to do. And in this case, think about, joining this workshop in the fall, email to get on the list. When the date got a little closer and our numbers weren't as high as we were hoping, I tried to develop another piece to try to entice them, like with almost anything that we seem to organize. And I know this on the personal level as well as work, people wait until the last minute to RSVP. So I was trying to stick something out there one more time to put it in front of our principals and our teachers, and I came up with this flyer on the left side. So for our presenters for the day, we had presenter Father Connors from the University of Notre Dame coming to do the homiletics piece. We had a gentleman by the name of Jason Cervinek coming from Ohio State, who's with their Bird Polar and Climate Research Center. Sister Sharon spoke again, so the teachers had heard her once, but we were hoping that the group would expand and thought it never hurts for them to hear another summary of Laudato Si, and she's from Lourdes College. And then we also had one of our very special priests, Monsignor, that spoke for us, Father Charlie Ritter, on Catholic social teaching and the histories of where Laudato Si fits in our history as Catholics. And then we also had a gentleman come to speak about energy audits. And then actually Jose was there to represent the Catholic Climate Covenant, and Matt Jones from the USCCB also spoke. So I put this flyer out there as a way to have one more way to remind people to join, to try to bring our numbers up. And in the end, we were real happy with how things turned out. We wanted to also make sure that the information would be there, and we wanted to try to go not totally paperless, but use as little paper as we could. Sometimes when we get together for these workshops, we end up with binders full or fat folders full of paper that may or may not get read by people after they leave, but really wanted to try to have things easy to find. So Catholic Charities has a site link from the diocesan page, and we had them add a special page for this workshop. And each of the, as you can see, all the different red underlined sections are other links. So some of these, you might even recognize from the Catholic Climate Covenant, like the Roadmap for Success, which is for the Creation Care teams. And so that when people go back, if they're to search Catholic Charities Toledo or Common Home for the workshop, that they would be able to find the resources and still have them at their access. We were very happy with our attendance. From having probably about 30 at that first conference the year before, we had over 150 people attend. We represented all 19 counties, so we were excited about that. We really encouraged teachers to try to include their deacons and priests, and we had, as I said, we put out one of the postcards through our contact with the religious orders to make sure that they were passed on early enough that people could get it on their schedule. So it's a little bit of a breakdown. There were 96 people that attended as part of a team. One of the biggest blessings that we think that we had for attendance for the conference is that we had an anonymous donor say that if 4 people from a specific parish would attend, that their fee would be covered. So conference fee was $20 to attend, and if 4 attended, and we had 96 of the people ended up being part of a team. So it ended up being a little bit more of maybe a higher donation that that person was hoping, but did not flinch at that at all, was very happy to see that it did make a difference. And we had 61 of the group were teachers. And then we surveyed afterwards to kind of see if we were going the right direction, what might people want to do next. So what we did was, through the survey, we found out that we do have a group of people that are willing to and interested in starting creation care teams. Several, as you can see, wanted to do some kind of an energy audit. So we're looking into how to pursue some of that. I actually have a meeting scheduled next week at one of the parishes outside the Toledo area to get a group together to start talking about forming creation care teams. I will be meeting with my teacher group, which ends up being a group of about 40 teachers or so that meet regularly. We meet in December, and the emphasis on that meeting is going to be on children in hunger. And so how do we help students coming from conditions of hunger and raising awareness about food waste? And so in the afternoons, as they network and have an opportunity to dig deeper, those resources that I shared earlier in Google Classroom will be there. So if they have chosen to do something with energy, or chosen to do something with gardening or water clarification, or something that might have to do with environmentally that direction, that those resources are there each time we gather together, and they can partner with someone else in their grade level or partner with someone else that has a similar interest to maximize the talents that they have to share. So thank you very much. So as I mentioned,
Great.
those are some of the initiatives that we have going for the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Peggy. We're running a little late, and so I wanted to answer just quickly some of the questions that have been popping up. And to say that Paz and I had follow-up conversations with Stephanie and Peggy regarding the success of their conferences. And to note first that in addition to Peggy having 153 attend their conference, Stephanie had over 200 people attend their conference. And 3 factors that they attribute to the success of this, the success of this, number 1, to have the bishop's leadership and endorsement, and whether the bishop is called within himself to bring this forth, and in addition, constituents asking him to make care for creation a priority within the diocese. That's the first. The second is within the diocese to have champions like Peggy, Nick, and Stephanie to be able to carry this with inspiration. And the third is to have a task force that meets on a regular basis to continue to build the momentum that leads up not only to the success of the conference, but to sustain that care for creation activity into the future, as you've heard. A logistical note, both Peggy's and Stephanie's presentations are going to be on the Covenant's website, so you can gather all of their materials. And then also Peggy and Stephanie are willing to hear from you. Their contact information will be made available so you can get more detail on how to inspire your parishes and dioceses in this work. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to provide some insights on how you can recruit your fellow parishioners, pastors, and bishops into this work. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Jose. Chris West from Catholic Relief Services. Most of you know Catholic Relief is the Bishop's international arm for relief and development around the world. Part of the reason I note that is that we're currently working in over 100 countries around the world, and we're already doing climate mitigation work. So for us, I know in the United States, some people debate whether climate change is real or not. We're already mitigating. In fact, I would like to note, and I'll throw a link up in the chat area, some of our colleagues were interviewed by the Washington Post for a story that's near and dear to my heart, and it's the race to save coffee. So CRS is highlighted in that. My starting point for this talk is Jose and I met actually in Burlington, and as we were talking, he noted that a lot of people within the Catholic Climate Covenant have been expressing frustration that there are too few people to care about this issue or to work on this issue, and that we're sometimes frustrated. And so he asked me to share some of our workshop there and what we had talked about. So 3 key points that I just want to make briefly. One is this idea that people are motivated by self-interest. The things that they care about to either act on, to care about, and that self-interest changes over time. I use the example of the fact that I was very interested in youth soccer for a period of time in my life, and that's when my children were involved in youth soccer. As I began thinking about trying to engage people in this larger issue, one of the key stories that I tell is I came home from work one day. My daughter yelled at me to turn off the lights because she had learned about the plight of the polar bears and climate change. And she wanted all of us to keep the lights off in order to save the polar bears. I had to do a little bit of education and share with her that keeping our lights off weren't going to save the polar bears, that we needed to take action politically. And so she ended up writing to her congressperson. The reason I share the story is twofold. One is that my daughter got interested in climate change not because of climate change. She got interested because of polar bears. I went on to tell the story at the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering, and later was confronted by a woman who told me that my daughter was wrong to care about the polar bears, and that was telling me that climate change was about people and that we've got to save the people. And that's really the key core piece in climate change. So that brings up to the second point. The first, of course, is that people are motivated by their own self-interest, and that changes. The second point is that we ought to be taking people where they are, not where we want them to be. Within the world of social justice, or in the Catholic social justice movement, sometimes we have a tendency to put on to people that they should care about a particular issue because Catholic social teaching tells us that we should care, or the Bible tells us, or whatever reason. And the reality is that we need to be taking people where they are. I use a story of the woman confronting me about my daughter because I would much rather my daughter be involved in the climate change fight for the perceived wrong reason, caring about polar bears versus caring about people, than not having her involved. So one lesson there is, how often are we putting up barriers for people to get involved because they may not be involved for the right reasons or the correct reasons? The third thing I want to note is engaging people. If we think about the idea of self-interest as moving people and then taking people where they are, that requires an invitation in based on listening to what people care about. People may get involved in the climate change issue for a wide variety of reasons. It could be because they're avid fishermen and they're seeing changes in fish populations. It could be that they love nature. It could be that they care about the future for their grandchildren. So by taking time to figure out what it is people care about and then tying the issue to those interests that they have is a better way to bring people in. Finally, I just want to note that between personal invitation is a key to invite people to be engaged. And when you think about conferences, flyers, announcements, bulletin, all of those should be supplemental to the personal invitation. And part of the personal invitation would be encouraging people who do care about this to invite other people in. Finally, sometimes in the climate change debate, we get caught up in the statistics, the facts, the science behind it. And we need to remember that it's the metaphors and the stories that move people, not to devalue the science or the statistics, but often that those aren't what captures people's hearts. So in conclusion, tapping people's self-interest, taking people where they are, not where we want them to be, using personal invitation and stories in order to engage people. Just a couple brief things I wanted to mention, and I'll turn it back to Jose to get to some of the questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And we welcome your questions. We have Paz, was wondering if you could facilitate this part.
Sure. I think we can start with the questions that were at the beginning. going towards Stephanie. And those, Stephanie, had to do with how did you get the diocese involved in this issue? A lot of the questions were in that perspective. How did then you reach out to the parishes within the diocese? And the second area was how did you promote and advertise the conferences? How do you engage youth? And if the average age of the attendees was over 60 or under 60. Stephanie, I don't think we can hear you. Peggy, could you answer some of those questions if Stephanie's not on?
Sure. So I think if any of those questions were asked before I spoke, some of mine might have been covered by some of the flyers and posters. But I agree very much with Chris that we found that although posters and flyers give you something that might be your reminder, the biggest hook to get people involved were the personal invitations and invitations from the leadership. So by having the bishop also, his stamp of approval on the program that we were putting on, and him doing a blurb that would be able to go out. A blurb isn't a very official way of saying that, but him to be able to confirm that he would like to see people attend the event and that he came and spoke. His piece was only about 15 minutes, but that seemed to make a big difference.
Okay, Stephanie, have you gotten on now? I can see her that she's there, but I'm not sure if she's not muted. So at this point, let me go to Chris. There's a question here for you. What methods are best to find out what people care about? And this is a question from Ohio.
Yeah, great. So one of the keys is obviously listening and having conversations with people, but there are other ways of doing it as well. For example, if a parish is hosting an event on climate and people come, to have a sign-up sheet which says, if you're interested in learning more, please sign up. And then making sure that you follow up in a timely method. Having opportunities for people to self-identify is great. The other piece that we've seen success in is when people from one particular ministry will make the rounds within a parish and talk, engage with leaders from other ministries to do some sharing. What is your ministry currently doing? What's your focus? Here's what we're doing. Here's what our focus is. Where do we see overlap? But it does take time. The good news is that you can build strong coalitions through a listening campaign. The challenge to that is often a slower process than other methods, or like I would love to see just hundreds and hundreds of people show up every time. The reality is that it takes a small core group of people working. I would really encourage for anyone working on this on a parish level to make sure that you've got a team of anywhere between 8 and 10 people who are trying to carry the work on a regular basis, and that core team is able to then invite other people in for various events or action steps. So one piece of advice is to have groups build in kind of a recruitment factor at every meeting, like who are we reaching out to, what have we learned, and so that is taking place in between meeting or event planning.
Great, thank you, Chris. Stephanie, are you there and can you hear us? Okay, I think Stephanie's still having issues with her audio. Peggy, question for you.
Hi, I'm back.
Oh,
Not to
Stephanie.
interrupt.
Okay, there you are. I don't know if you got to hear some of the questions that I had posed.
I heard the question about how something about how to get the diocese involved.
Right. The questions were, how did you take the diocese to take this issue on?
Sure.
The second question was, had to do with reaching out to the parishes. How did you do that? And the third part was the average age of attendees and whether or not there were youthful attendees, and how do you get youth to engage?
Sure. I will answer as quickly as I can. The whole idea of having a year of creation was actually Bishop Coyne's idea. So we are very fortunate that it wasn't a matter of getting the diocese involved because it was coming from the bishop. And then once he had kind of shared that idea with the Mission Outreach Office, which is me, we immediately got the committee together that then could work on reaching out to the parishes. So again, since our mission office is so small, that was a really important part for us. And we used all of the communication avenues that we already have in place. So that's our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, as well as Vimeo and Flickr for imagery. And then we have a weekly bulletin that goes out from the diocese to every parish. We have a quarterly print magazine. So we used all of those to lead up to the launch of the year and then to keep people informed about what was going on throughout the year. We also communicated directly with our parish offices. So whether that's an administrator in the office or the pastor himself. And we really tried to use existing resources from the Covenant, from the Catholic Climate Movement, from CRS, and say, hey, here's this great resource. All you have to do is say yes. We will come, we will promote it, we will do it. You just have to say yes, that you want it to happen in your parish, and then promote it, in your local bulletin and these sorts of ways as well. We also hung posters in coffee shops and libraries and things like that. So it was kind of a double approach, one going through the pastors and then also going through the parishioners through the Facebook and the bulletins and things like that, word of mouth as well. If we knew there's somebody there who really cares about these issues, reaching out to that person and saying, hey, will you be point person here in your parish? And now one of the things we asked when people registered for the conference was for their parish affiliation. So moving forward, I really know exactly who to go to in a specific parish to initiate something like this. The third part of the question, what was the third part?
Ages, whether or not
yes.
they were over 60 and how to engage youth.
Sure. We did, people I feel like tend to always say like that this is a young person's issue, but I certainly didn't feel like there was an overwhelming presence of young people at our events. One thing that was very directly pointed out to us was, as far as our college students are concerned, a transportation issue. So when we had the Stations of the Cross event during Lent, that was only a few blocks from the University of Vermont campus. So we did have a handful of college students who walked, even though it was not that warm out. But then the other large college here, St. Michael's College, is not within walking distance. And those students specifically said to us, I wanted to be there, but I had no way to get there. So then when we were planning for the conference in the fall, which was at St. Michael's College, the Catholic Center at the University of Vermont made special attention to carpool over to the conference. So they had a couple vans of students and staff and the pastor from there who all came over together. So I think in the future, something to really keep in mind as far as that sort of young adult youth participation is how are they going to get there? And then the carpooling also was promoted as a means of being eco-friendly in your effort to get to this conference. The other part that really reached out to the youth was the Catholic Schools Care for Creation Day. And while most of our schools were all already doing an awesome job with their students on these themes, that was a very visible way that the young people were involved. Other things that I honestly could have done better about, but I think were certainly considered was more family approach to things. So our conference probably wouldn't have been super fun for like grade school students, but some of our other events, things that might have been outside, there was a retreat up at the shrine on the islands in Vermont, things like that that could be more family oriented would certainly get the youth more involved.
Great, thank you. Because of time, I'm going to let folks know that if we didn't get to their questions, we will do so individually. But before we go, Peggy, there was a question about resources for teachers, and if you had a list of those, if that could become available. And then Chris, there is a question for you on Fight for Coffee, if you could give a few seconds on that.
Okay, thank you. This is Peggy. And yes, I'd be happy to share those resources out. Jose had mentioned that there might possibly be a separate webinar. We'll see if anything happens with that. That might just be a little bit more geared towards that approach, but I would be very happy to put those into some type of a Word doc that might make it easier.
And I would also just note to Jason's question, we've got a whole bunch of stuff on our Coffeelands blog, including the piece I just linked there on restoring some of the small coffee farms. In a nutshell, the way that the coffee industry works is better coffee is grown at altitude, and as the Earth's temperature rises, it pushes coffee growing areas higher and higher up the mountains. And as most of us know, it gets thinner toward the top of the mountain, which means that there's less room to grow coffee. That's in a very, very brief nutshell. There are also pests and other problems associated with it, but you can find out a lot more on our Coffeelands blog.
Thank you. Jose?
Just a deep note of thanks to all of our presenters for being such champions for Care for Creation and providing us with these practical as well as inspirational insights. Feel free to reach out to them and to see their materials on our website, and we will get back to your questions as well as soon as possible. So blessings to everyone on this call, and ask that you go forth infused with the Holy Spirit and care for all. Peace.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.